Okay, so our next step is to put in some patient settings, and according to the manufacturer, you can use a bias flow of 10 to 15 liters per minute for a preterm infant and 15 to 20 liters per minute for a term infant. Another suggestion would be to place the bias flow 5 above the mean airway pressure that you want set. So that's another option that some facilities utilize. So let's say that we're setting it up for a preterm infant. We're going to start with our bias flow at 15. And in this case, we're going to start with a map of 10 as an example. Here we have our power, which I've already turned down to 2 because that's a good starting point for a neonate. You do the test on 6, so always make sure that you turn it back down to 2 prior to placing it on the patient, because 6 would be way too much for an infant, too much amplitude. So now we're going to turn on our vent with our power switch. And we're going to pressurize our system. And it's going to give us mean airway pressure. Now it's at 14.4 because we did turn that bias flow down from 20 to 15. So you remember in the pre-check it was at 19 to 21 with a bias flow of 20. So we've decreased the bias flow. The bias flow does affect our mean airway pressure, so be advised if you're not able to achieve the mean airway pressure that you're seeking, you might need a little bit more bias flow. So over here, we're going to adjust our knobs. So first we're going to set our limit. So we're going to just turn this down, and let's say we're going to put our limit at 13 because we're going to put our setting at 10. So we're going to go 3 above. That's close, okay? And then we're going to go over here to our adjust knob, the green knob, and now we're just going to dial this down until we get to 10 on our mean airway pressure. My colleague is setting those alarms so that we don't hear that during our setup. So be advised, you can set your max mean airway pressure 2 above and set the lower pressure 3 below. So we've got our lower at 7 and we're going to adjust our upper limit to 12. Alright, so now that that's set, we have our power adjusted to 2. 33% is an appropriate I time for percentage for a neonate. That's going to give us an I to E of 1 to 2. And then you can adjust your frequency based on the provider order. Typically that's going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 hertz. And then the next step would be to adjust your FiO2. So depending on what your baby is currently needing with either positive pressure ventilations or on the conventional ventilator, you can adjust that here. This particular blender turns on right here, and so this is where we're going to see our analyzed FiO2. This is a place to plug in your bag if you need to do that. We actually use the T-piece resuscitator here at my facility, but this could be a place to plug in your backup flow inflating bag if you wanted to do that. So for the next part, we would be attaching it to the patient. So we're going to adjust our amplitude after we attach to the patient. So I'm going to have my colleague pull out the stopper because that's going to cause us to need to reset. So here the stopper would be out. We're attaching to the patient. Go ahead and reinsert the stopper. We'll say that's our patient attachment. And now we're going to need to reset. So we're resetting. Now we're ready to start our oscillator, and we're going to adjust our amplitude to achieve wiggle between the nipple line and the umbilicus of the baby. And we're also going to center our piston. So let's center our piston. Our piston is centered now, and let's say that amplitude of 28 is giving us a little bit too much wiggle, so we could turn this down until we achieve the desired wiggle for that particular infant. And we can make any minute adjustments to our settings so that we maintain the appropriate mean airway pressure for the baby. Now, during the course of their ventilation with the oscillator, if you do need to make adjustments, it's important to make sure that you have provider orders for the appropriate settings that they would like the baby to be placed on. And if you do need to alter the settings, you can change them from here. You want to be cautious as far as disconnecting the circuit, because we can see that we're establishing a mean airway pressure for the baby, and if we disconnect them from the oscillator, they're going to de-recruit. So make sure that you're cognizant of that. The next thing to be mindful of is the piston only needs to be stopped here when the provider wants to listen to the baby's breath sounds. We will maintain our mean airway pressure during that time. They finish listening, okay, we're starting the piston back again. So that's the basic setup for the oscillator, and we'll talk in the future about how to connect the nitric oxide adapter to the oscillator.